John Banks.
Speaker.
Mr. Chair.
Bill English is doing a great job. He is a class act amongst treasurers in the OECD. If you don't accept that, then I ask you to invite the library to give you some significant headline statistics about this country's economic well-being over these last 5 years, where it's come from and where it's at. The quickest way we can secure New Zealand's future, Mr. Speaker, is to live within our means and stop living beyond our means and borrowing the savings of others overseas for today's consumptions. The mind boggles at the post-Cullen leadership of the financial propositions on that side of the House these last 6 years. The mind boggles if that crowd were on this side of the House pulling the levers at Treasury over these last 5 years. I put my hand on my heart and say the only policy I've heard from the Labor Party opposition in recent days around the economic and social well-being of this country is for a baby bonus for people earning just $150,000 a year. That is the only public policy proposition that they've announced, apart from criticising every single cut, every single saving and every single turn this Minister of Finance has made these last 5 years. The deficit is down from $7.9 billion in the year 30 June 12 to $4.4 billion this year. But we are still borrowing $110 million every week from the borrowing and savings of people that don't live in this country. And in other words, putting in hock future generations for our consumption today on silly propositions like giving universal superannuation to 65-year-olds or 66-year-olds. It should be 67, and I'll give you 1.8 billion reasons why it should be elevated over 20 years to 67, and the 1.8 billion reasons in today's money is $1.8 billion a year in savings. And if we had a reasonable amount of interest on so-called student-free, interest-free loans, then the Treasury would gain by $2.2 billion a year, and it would stop us saving and borrowing $110 million a week as we do now. The baby bonus is the kind of poor structural defining of the policy thinking of this bankrupt Labor Party opposition of it. I cannot, and if there's something that the Labor Party is proposing that'll stop us from borrowing more money and stop this country from getting into their hands, well, I want to hear it from them this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, last year Treasury published their 13th statement on long-term fiscal policy. It shows that current spending programs, particularly in superannuation and healthcare, are unsustainable without increasing revenue or other cutting expenditure or both. But what do we hear from the Labor Party, Mr. Treasurer? They're proposing to increase taxes, have more borrowing. That is what they're proposing. If they get themselves to this side of the House, they've got no sensible propositions around investment, growth, jobs and well-being. The Treasury describes this proposition of our spending programs as fiscally challenging, and it is. It is fiscally challenging, and let's give credit to this Treasurer, I think one of the best Treasurers this country's ever had, and probably the best in the OECD right now. He has said tie-ho on this expenditure. He has said we've got to cut our cloth, and that's what we've done. We've got through this global crisis with $60 billion worth of debt. $60 billion. It's further evidence that we're spending beyond our means. And the Fabians within the New Zealand First Parliament are just as bad as the Greens and the Labor Party when it comes to fiscal responsibility and their bankruptcy around investment, growth in jobs, and we don't hear anything of that. And I want to ask the next speaker, the leader of New Zealand First, to tell us exactly what he would propose if he was sitting here come the end of the year in terms of where this country needs to be going.
I call the honourable member Andrew William.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and I wish to speak on behalf of New Zealand First in terms of the national government's economic failure. This government, that despite 40 years, the best 40 years in terms of trade, because of the dairy boom that they're having, manages to put this economy in a perilous state. With 150,000 unemployed people, more than when they came into office, significantly more than when they came into office, and now with $60 billion in government debt, while New Zealand's net international debt has risen to $150 billion, a staggering sum. And that government debt of $60 billion is 10 times what the national government inherited from the former Labour government supported by New Zealand First. 10 times the debt, which was $6 billion when National took office. Meanwhile, what are we seeing, Mr Chair? We're seeing Kiwi workers with virtually static wages, those on low